Hello, my name's Tom Walker. Welcome to this podcast. Now, occasionally I get the pleasure of meeting somebody who is interesting. And today is definitely one of those occasions, because with me is a lady called Sue Hogge, who, among other things, lives on a boat. And we're going to talk about that, I think, because among us visually impaired people, that's relatively unusual, I would have thought. Somebody may correct me. Sue, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Am I right in saying that you're unusual in that you live on a boat?
As a blind person, I think I'm probably unique, to be honest.
Before we talk about your life living on the boat, Sue, tell me about your early life. And were there any clues that you were going to be waterbound?
Well, it's interesting, but not a single clue, no. I had never planned to end up living on a canal boat.
Before you started to lose your sight 20 years ago, Sue, you worked and did many other things. Tell us about that.
Well, I had a very normal, happy upbringing, large garden, went to the local primary school, the local grammar school, and then to Sheffield University, where I studied genetics. Launched myself into a PhD in the genetics of mosquitos, which took me to the Solomon Islands in the South Pacific, which was very exciting. And then on the way back, to save money, I decided to fly using indulgence flights of the RAF, and I was waiting in Hong Kong for one of these flights when I met a very handsome officer in the British Army, and that was the end of my glittering career. So I did write a paper. I worked at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. I brought colonies of mosquitoes from the South Pacific to London to work on elephantiasis research. But I ended up marrying and then going to Germany, to America, to Ireland as an army wife. So jobs were pretty scrappy, if I can use that word. You just did what you could, nothing very dramatic. And then my husband retired and we were in Yorkshire, and they do say Yorkshire is the graveyard of ambition. So people come to Yorkshire and then they never leave. We were one of those families. So we bought a house near Malton in North Yorkshire. My husband worked in Glasgow and Edinburgh and London. I stayed in Yorkshire. The children went to local schools. And then I got a more interesting job after that, working with hydropower, Archimedes screw hydropower.
When you were doing your PhD, what were your ambitions? What were you hoping to do once you became a doctor?
Well, I would have assumed that I would go into research, genetic research. And interestingly, the work I did threw up some very curious results where the crosses didn't work the way we expected. And it turned out that that is to do with cytoplasmic incompatibility, which is cystic fibrosis. So if I had stayed in the field, I would probably be a cystic fibrosis expert.
Knowing what you know now about your visual impairment, if you were trying to do the PhD now, would it have been extremely difficult? What would the challenges have been?
I completely missed out a phase. I went through, I tried to do another PhD in prostate cancer research, and I also tried to teach. I did a PGCE, and in fact the challenges are that once you can't see properly, it is very difficult to do an awful lot of things. It is difficult. So I think that would have been hard to have carried on doing research. It would have been difficult, and really I couldn't manage teaching.
Is there something quite visual about genetics that would have made it quite challenging for a visually impaired person?
It's so varied in what it is. It was very much visual. It was looking down microscopes, it was crossing animals, all this sort of thing. It has become so tiny, the scale is tiny, it's viruses and vectors, that I'm not sure whether you could do it more easily now with a visual impairment almost. And of course, with all the access to work sort of thing, they would have to make it possible for you if you wanted to do it, I think.
And at the age of 30, am I right in saying
Yeah.
you began to wonder whether there was a problem with your eyesight?
Well, I was told when I was 30, when we were going to Washington, D.C., with my husband's job to go to the embassy in Washington, that I did have RP, retinitis pigmentosa. I had absolutely not a clue until that point. And so because it wasn't at all obvious, I just carried on as normal, carried on driving, and everything was fine. But when I reached 45, there was a comment, "Did you see that cyclist?" when I was driving. And I said, "What cyclist?" So I went to have my eyes tested by this special person. The results were sent to DVLA, and I got a letter on Friday. And on the Monday, I had to give my driving license up, which was a bit shocking. So that was May the 1st, 2000.
How did you feel about that? Because that's quite a big thing.
Absolutely gutted, devastated, because I'm living in a house in a village in the middle of North Yorkshire. There were no buses, and I spent from 2000 to 2010 living in a village with no transport except a bus 3 times a week. So I'd cycle. I'd have to it was pretty grim, actually. Not good at all. No, it wasn't good.
What support did you get from sort of the organisations in the VI sector, in the visual impairment sector?
Well, I was a person in complete denial, and I'm still not totally identifying myself as a blind person, even though I use a long white cane and all the rest of it. So I didn't tap into any of those facilities particularly. Well, I did tap into having a local, what do they call it? You have an adult, not a care package. What do they call it?
I'm not sure.
Yeah. Anyway, so I was very independent. I didn't do an awful lot to do with the blind community to start with. I just managed. And then I decided I needed to get into town. So I moved into York, into a small flat as a compromise, leaving my husband in the family home in the village. And then I started again more as a blind person in York. And then I started to make friends. I joined the local My Sight blind organisation. I made other blind friends. And then I started to enter the world of being blind.
And was this when you started to think of yourself, to define yourself as being a visually impaired person?
Yeah. In about 2010. And I think getting a long white cane is the hugely significant thing. I really put it off. And when I finally bit the bullet and had one, it was such a relief because I could now walk fast, confident I wasn't going to fall over. Other people could get out of my way. It was very liberating, actually. I felt much better once I'd got my long white cane.
We hear from a lot of visually impaired people that the process of registration is really important and was really important to them. Was that something that you felt when you became registered?
I did. It was difficult because you had to explain how horribly blind you were, which is not a nice thing to have to do. But then I was encouraged to apply for PIP. It was called something different then, wasn't it?
DLA, Disability Living Allowance.
Yeah, Disability Living Allowance. And I thought, well, blow it, I'll go for this. And I got my half-price telly license and all that. Yes, it was very, very difficult. And the PIP thing was horrible as well. I think it's demeaning the way they do it. But it was part of my identifying myself as visually impaired.
How does the visual impairment or visually impaired community, how do we compare with the type of people that you were mixing with when you were, well, when you, at least you thought you were completely fully sighted?
The difference is there are more single people amongst the blind community. So as a single person, because I ended up separating from my husband and we sold the family home, which is how I now had the money to buy my boat. So he lives in a house somewhere else and I live on my boat. there are a lot of single people in the blind community, so I have, in a way, lots of friends as a single person.
Why are there so many single visually impaired people from your perspective? What do you think it is?
It's a very interesting question, that, because I just throw myself back onto the dating market, and I had to think very hard when it came to the point, do you have any physical disabilities? And I put, ask me later. And I met half a dozen chaps, and one of them said, yes, you wouldn't have got a single response if you'd said you were blind.
Good Lord.
So I think it is very difficult for sighted people to imagine going out with a blind person. Now, some of my single-sighted friends were married, and they're now single. So maybe I'm just moving amongst single people because I am single. Maybe if I was married, I would be moving amongst married blind people more. I'm not sure.
If you think of yourself as a fully sighted Sue 20 or 30 years ago, and dating websites had existed then, would you have looked askance at a blind person, or do you think you'd have been open-minded enough maybe to say, you know what, I'll find out more?
Well, it's a tricky one, that, because if you're blind, you can't drive. And not driving is a huge different lifestyle to driving. So if you're looking for somebody to go and do things with and they don't drive, it's a different beast. So if I was fully sighted, I would think twice about going out with someone who is blind. I'm really hesitating to say that, but that's really, I think, the way it would be.
I think it's just
because even now I'd like to go out with somebody who's got a car, because it's more fun and easier, really.
So now we find you living on a boat.
Yes.
And we think that this probably makes you unique, or pretty much unique. The unique Sue Hogge on the boat.
Completely mad, actually.
Tell me about the boat. Describe it to me. And I also want to know how you steer this thing and avoid, I don't know, colliding with other boats or whatever. Whatever you might collide with.
Well, I tell you what, I'll start by telling that as a registered severely sight impaired brackets blind, I always like the brackets blind. So I'm a brackets blind person. I am not allowed to drive the boat on my own with nobody else on board. So that's a great relief, isn't it, to hear that?
I think everybody, the whole boating community, is probably breathing a sigh of relief as they listen, if they are listening.
But I did actually find that I'm perfectly capable of steering as long as I concentrate, because I've got a good central vision. I'm perfect, and in fact, I'm quite good because I'm very gentle at the helm. I don't thrash it forwards and thrash it backwards like a lot of people seem to do. So I'm very gentle. The boat is 60 foot long, 10 foot wide, and basically a metal box. She's got a great big, she's painted bright green with a huge tree on the side, and beautifully made in Poland, wood, lovely, with wooden blinds, with sort of slats and things like that.
And what's the boat's name?
The boat is called Kululeka, which was the name given by the owners, the people who had it built, South African couple, and it means free spirit.
That describes you quite well, I imagine.
Well, it'd be nice to think that, wouldn't it? It's the image, not the truth at all. We actually had a very interesting time. I set off from here in September of last year for a 3-week holiday to go from York to Leeds up to Skipton and back. And I ended up not being able to get back until July of the following year. So all the floods, the locks that broke, the canals that leaked, so much, just impossible to get back. So we finally got back in July. So the boat became quite well known on the Leeds to Liverpool Canal.
Presumably you know the canal network quite well then, do you?
I only know the local bit. I only know the bit from here to Skipton, really. And if you get yourself a map, it's the most wonderful network. There's thousands of miles. but you're only going at 4 miles an hour, so you're not going to get to know an awful lot of it at 4 miles an hour.
And presumably, things like doing the locks and all that sort of stuff, you can do perfectly easily, I guess.
I do it. I'm scared when I do it because they're very deep, but I always wear a life jacket and I just have to concentrate. But I do absolutely love doing the locks, and often I walk between the locks because they're not very far apart, some of these. And Simon will be at the tiller, so we are amicably separated. So he's usually at the tiller. I'm walking along the bank and working the locks. And I will try and get a passerby to help me if I can. And people absolutely love to help because you've got these fabulous, magnificent old lock gates and all this ancient 200-year-old machinery that you're cranking and winding. It's just the most wonderful experience.
Do you sort of wave a white cane at the passers-by and say, "I'm actually visually impaired," or do they regard you as a damsel in distress who just needs help?
No, I don't. People have got to learn it, but it is a funny old thing. I think I tell them when I'm working with a lock keeper, because you have some of them, there are 5 locks, all in a row, like Bingley 5. So the lock keeper will work it with you. I do tell them I'm visually impaired so that they can make allowances and just wait for me to sort of spot them. There's a lot of saying, "You who over here?" And I'm going, where? So I've got tunnel vision. But it's such a laugh. It really is. And the lock keepers are fantastic. And yeah, we met so many interesting people. Fantastic.
Have you ever fallen in the canal?
No, I haven't. No. In fact, it's not very deep. It's only probably 3 foot deep.
So it wouldn't matter too much.
Yeah, it wouldn't really matter. You get a bit wet, but you wouldn't drown.
What would you say to visually impaired people who are listening to you thinking, "You know what, living on a boat sounds all right"? Would you say do it, don't do it? What advice would you give to them?
I would say do it because actually it's a very good environment. It's like living in a caravan. So you think of these big mobile homes, everything's in the place, you put it where you want it. Yes, it's a good environment. The winter is difficult because it's just so physical. It's wet. It's just very, very physical. It gets cold quickly, it gets hot quickly. There's a lot of stuff to be done all the time, regulating electricity, filling up with water, filling up with diesel. So it's not easy, but if you had a bit of guts, yeah, you could do it.
I haven't known you for very long, but one thing I have picked up is that it seems to be quite a sociable way of life, in that you seem to sort of meet people quite regularly.
You're absolutely right. On the canals, the whole ethos of the canals is the camaraderie of being on a canal. So if you chose to live on the canal, moving about, you would always have people that you would meet, that you would make friends with. They might not be long-term friends and they might not be very deep friends, but you would have plenty of people to meet. Where I'm living now is more like living on a campsite. So there is it's called Riverside Camping and Caravan Park. So there are tents and caravans. There's a beautiful big new restaurant. But there are about 30 boats tied to the riverbank, either tied directly or tied to a floating pontoon. So I'm on a pontoon, but you have people walking up and down, dogs, you have other boat people camping, caravanning. Yeah, it is sociable. So during lockdown, it's really been a good place to be honest.
So finally then, do you imagine that, you will continue to live on the boat, for the foreseeable future?
That is a brilliant question. On a good day, I wouldn't be anywhere else on the planet than on this boat. And on a bad day in the middle of winter, I think it's time to leave and stop doing this. But at the moment, my plans are to keep living on this boat, and I do love it, and I do want anyone who wants to come and see me. It is a wonderful thing to do, living on a canal boat.
So there you go, everybody. You've got an open invitation to go and visit Sue on her boat. Now, because I like terra firma, the nearest I would ever get to your boat would be the restaurant on the campsite, I'm afraid.
Oh no, you must come and see me, Tom. Come on. It's actually jolly steady. It doesn't move at all. It weighs a lot. I think it's 20 tons. Very solid, and it's got a flat bottom, so it doesn't move very much at all. Doesn't sort of rock.
Okay, I'm slowly becoming persuaded, and maybe persuadable. Sue, thanks very much indeed for your time. Thank you.